They say you remember the way people make you feel more than what they said. But I remember exactly what she said that day. We were at the lake house in Vermont. It was July. Not too hot, just enough breeze off the water to keep the tablecloths from sticking to the wood. The kind of summer weather that tricks you into thinking everything's fine. My mother, Joanne Jordan, had just refilled her wine glass. She was wearing her favorite lake earrings, turquoise drops shaped like tiny leaves. When she stood and tapped at the side of her glass, I thought she was going to say something about Dad. It would have been 10 years next week. Or maybe she'd say something about family, togetherness, the usual. But no. She looked at my sister Emily and said, "To the only child who stayed loyal." There was a pause, like the room hadn't caught up yet. Then came the laughter, nervous at first, then full. My cousins clapped. Uncle Dennis let out a whistle. Emily smiled the way she always did when things went her way, small, like she didn't want to gloat. But she did. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, behind the grill, tongs in one hand, napkin in the other. I wasn't in a single photo that day, not from what I could see. When Aunt June asked if I could take one of her and the girls, she handed me the phone without a second glance. No one noticed when I slipped inside. Back in the hallway, I opened my laptop, slid the file into the presentation queue behind the family slideshow Emily had prepared. No one knew I'd added my own version. No one asked. When I walked back out, my mother caught my eye across the table. She smiled like everything was fine. I smiled back. "You'll remember this day," I said quietly. "Just not how you think." 10 minutes later, I played the video. 20 minutes after that, no one at the table could look each other in the eye. My name is Claire Jordan. I'm 38. I used to teach 8th grade English in Connecticut. These days, I work freelance, editing manuscripts, writing small things for small places. It doesn't sound like much, but I've built something that's mine, quietly and without permission. I'm the older one. Emily is 3 years younger. When we were kids, people used to say we balanced each other out. I was the steady one. Books, quiet rooms, early bedtimes. Emily was all movement. Barefoot in the yard, singing at the top of her lungs, bleeding from knees she didn't bother to patch. Mom, Joanne, used to laugh when Emily interrupted dinner to show off a play she'd written in the garage. She clapped the loudest. I remember that. I remember watching her face. When I brought home straight A's, she'd nod. "I never had to worry about you," she'd say. And then she'd turn to Emily, who'd failed her math test, and hug her so tightly, like failing was somehow braver than passing. I used to think that was love. That what we needed most determined how much we were given. I didn't need much, so I didn't get much. It made sense back then, but the older I got, the more that kind of love felt like an agreement I hadn't signed. Dad, Mark Jordan, was the quiet one. A machinist who built boats in his free time. He never raised his voice in that house. He wasn't affectionate in the way people write poems about, but he showed up, every school concert, every late night ride to pick me up from rehearsal. He once told me in the garage one winter that he liked the way I watched people. "You see what's missing, Claire," he said. "That's a gift. Just don't let it turn into a burden." He passed away 10 years ago. A quiet heart attack in the driveway while loading groceries. After that, the house got quieter in some ways, louder in others, and the space between me and my mother that had always been there suddenly felt permanent. After Dad died, things shifted fast. Emily moved back home within 3 months. She said she needed to be close. She brought a new boyfriend with her, then another, then none at all. She was 28 and still searching, Mom said. Still soft, still healing. I lived 2 states over in a small town outside Worcester. I called. I sent flowers that first Christmas. Drove down for Easter brunch and found out they'd already eaten. Mom waved it off. "I thought you weren't coming. You never confirmed things." That wasn't true, but I let it pass. You learn after a while which arguments are just delays dressed as conversations. A year later, Emily's marriage fell apart. I don't know the details. One day there were photos of the wedding on the fridge, and the next, a cardboard box of her things by the door. She didn't cry much, just moved back into her old room and called it a reset. Joanne let her, said nothing about the car Emily dented in the driveway or the utilities she forgot to pay. "Family is family," she said. "Emily needs time." When I visited, My old bedroom had changed. Mom turned it into a sewing room. Fabric stacked on the bed, pins stuck in every cushion. "Oh, you still wanted to sleep here?" she asked. "I can clear some space on the floor." I stayed in a motel that night. Just said I had a lot of work calls. What I didn't say, last year, I paid for a chunk of the lake house roof. I sent money without being asked. A quiet gift. Not once did Mom mention it. But when Emily bought patio lights with Joanne's card, she got a thank you dinner. I've learned something about invisibility. It's not just being left out of the photo. Sometimes it's standing in the frame, smiling, and watching someone else's name appear on the caption, and slowly, even your reflection starts to blur. It started with an email rejection. A small New England journal I'd pitched a story to, a piece about daughters who disappear in plain sight, wrote back to say they'd already received an almost identical submission. Same premise, same phrasing, even the same title. I asked for clarification. They sent a copy. The name on the byline, M. Jordan. I stared at it for a long time. Emily never wrote. Not seriously. She journaled about breakups and grocery lists. She once called semicolons fancy commas. But there it was in print, my voice wearing her name. A week later, I lost a spot at a writing retreat. A friend from college had invited me months ago. Suddenly, she backed out. Said the retreat had a reputation to protect. Wouldn't say more. It didn't make sense. I never missed a deadline, never turned in sloppy work. But something had shifted. Quiet, subtle. That same week, I saw Emily tagged in a post from that friend. A wine night. Smiles, candles, hashtag new connections. I asked Mom if she knew anything. She blinked slowly as if I'd asked something strange. Emily's just putting herself out there. You used to be like that, remember? No, I didn't remember because I never had that kind of permission. I began to realize how far the echo reached. I found out the family group chat had been renamed. I was no longer in it. When Aunt June asked if I could help proofread her church newsletter, Emily replied instead, "Send in my old template." Even used my intro paragraph. I didn't know whether to be angry or tired. It felt like I'd dropped my keys somewhere in a house that used to be mine. And now every room was locked from the inside. The worst part wasn't that Emily was taking my words. It was how easily the people around her believed they'd been hers all along. It was late spring when I drove up to Maine, to the cottage where Grandma Lois used to live. She passed 5 years ago, but the house had stayed in the family, mostly empty now, a place we were keeping for summer, though no one really came. I needed air, somewhere that didn't smell like old wine in comparison. The cottage was as I remembered. Low ceilings, pale curtains, a screen door that never quite latched. I cleaned out the pantry, swept dust from the floorboards, and found myself in the attic by accident, chasing a draft that turned out to be a loose window latch. That's where I found the box. It was tucked behind a stack of winter quilts. Nothing special on the outside, just a banker's box with yellowed tape. Inside were letters, photos, brittle receipts. I wouldn't have looked twice if I hadn't seen my mother's name in Grandma's handwriting. Joanne, June 1979. I sat down on the attic floor and read, slowly, carefully. Each letter was to Grandma Lois's sister, my great-aunt Frances. They weren't dramatic, not even angry, but they were honest in a way I'd never heard from anyone in my family. "Joanne's trying with Claire, but I can see her drifting," one letter said. "She wants to connect, but it's easier with Emily. Emily mirrors her. Claire makes her confront things she's never faced in herself." Another one, dated 2 years later. "Claire is quiet, yes, but she notices everything. I think that unnerves Joanne. She doesn't like being watched unless she's ready to perform." I read those lines 5 times. 6. I didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of moment, but something heavy inside me clicked loose. At the bottom of the box were old photos. One from my 5th birthday, Emily at the front with cake on her chin, me half-shadowed in the back. Then the original version, the same photo, uncropped. I stared at myself in that corner, slightly blurry, but still there. It wasn't just Emily who had rewritten things. It started much earlier than I'd thought. The invitation came by email, one of those group messages sent to too many people with too few details. Subject: Jordan family reunion. Summer at the lake. It was signed, Love, Joanne and Emily, as if that was a natural pairing, as if those two names had always hosted this family. I hadn't been invited in years, not formally. I'd shown up once unannounced, only to find the schedule had changed. Different weekend, different guest list. No one had told me, but this time I was included, almost like they'd forgotten to leave me out. Emily was organizing the slideshow. She called it family through the years. I emailed her to ask if she wanted some photos. Childhood birthdays, camping trips with dad, old snapshots of Grandma Lois at the beach. She replied 4 days later, I think we're good. Just trying to keep it current. You know how people hate long slideshows. I didn't answer. I scanned through the photos on my own, wondering when my face had started looking like someone else's memory. Mom called 2 weeks before the reunion. Said she was so glad I could come this year. Emily's really been doing so much for this family, she said. She's stepped up in ways I never imagined. I bit my lip and said nothing. I wondered what stepping up meant. Using my words, wearing my voice, being seen. I almost didn't go, but something in me, maybe that old part that used to win spelling bees and stay late to clean up the classroom, wanted to show up, to look them all in the eye and know, at least once, I hadn't disappeared by choice. I brought my own slideshow, not dramatic, just a file on a flash drive, quietly slipped into the presentation queue. I didn't know if I'd use it. I only knew I had to be ready. When I arrived that afternoon, the lake shimmered, just like always. The porch was full of folding chairs. The grill was already lit. My mother hugged me like we hadn't skipped anything. But in her eyes, there was a flicker, something rehearsed. I caught them by the garage, Emily and Uncle Dennis. He was holding a beer in one hand, gesturing with the other, like he was offering advice she didn't ask for. She smiled, tilted her head, touched his elbow lightly. I didn't hear much, just fragments. Claire's always been delicate about this stuff. She takes things too seriously. You know how she is. That was enough. Uncle Dennis saw me a few minutes later near the cooler. He didn't say hello, just nodded like I was someone he used to work with. The next morning, I woke up to an email. The publisher contact he'd promised to introduce me to gone. Things fell through, he wrote. Might not be the right fit after all. I didn't reply. Instead, I checked the shared family calendar. There was a note Emily had added weeks earlier. Asked Dennis about Claire's proposal. Not urgent. The lake house had never felt smaller. People brushing past each other in hallways, laughing too loudly, passing me paper plates without making eye contact. I brought brownies. No one touched them. Mom floated from guest to guest in her lake earrings, glass in hand, smiling like nothing ever needed to be explained. When she passed me, she paused just long enough to say, "You look tired, honey. Are you sleeping enough?" I smiled. Said, "Yes." But what I wanted to ask was this: when did I become a story they told behind closed doors? And how many of those stories started with the words, "You know how Claire is"? Dinner was served on long folding tables, dressed with linen runners and mismatched wildflowers. Someone played soft jazz from a speaker near the porch steps. The sun was low, painting everything gold, like it wanted us to believe this was a perfect day. Mom stood slowly, her glass lifted just above shoulder height. "I want to take a moment," she said, "to honor someone who's been my rock, my helper, my loyal one." There was a beat of silence before she turned to Emily and smiled, to the only child who stayed loyal. Applause, laughter, the scraping of chairs as people turned to look at her. Emily did her shy smile again, the one she wore like a soft badge. Her shoulders curled inward, like she didn't expect it, but of course she did. I didn't move. Aunt June leaned over and asked if I'd take a photo of the table. I nodded, lifted her phone, pressed the button. Then I walked back inside. The air conditioning hummed like a held breath. I opened the laptop near the drink station, where the slideshow was queued up and waiting. Emily's version was first. Edited, smooth, full of bright faces and perfect poses. My name appeared once, maybe twice, blurred, smiling in the back. I added mine to the queue, quietly, without erasing hers. 10 minutes later, everyone was called inside for a quick trip down memory lane. They filed in, sun-warmed and wine-happy, plates still full. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. First, hers. Photos of birthdays, graduations, beach days. Emily laughing, Emily dancing, Mom hugging her. Dad present, but always off to the side. No one seemed to notice what was missing until the file changed. Black screen, then Claire Jordan. A different story. And beneath it, sometimes what's cropped out matters more than what's left in. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I stood at the back of the room and waited. The first slide was familiar because they'd seen it before. My 5th birthday. The version Emily had used showed her in front, cake smeared on her chin, confetti in her hair. I was barely in the frame. But this time, the full photo appeared, uncropped. I was sitting to the side, holding the knife, the one who had cut the cake. My name was on the banner, not hers. Slide 2, a letter scanned and faded, in Grandma Lois's cursive. Her words filled the screen. Claire sees more than she says. Joanne finds that unsettling. I think Emily is easier. Silence spread like fog. Then came the audio. Faint at first, just voices over the crackle of a porch call. I'd recorded it 3 months ago. Emily's voice talking to Uncle Dennis. Claire still thinks she's the smart one. It's kind of sad, really. She never realized being right isn't the same as being wanted. Gasps 1 or 2, a hand over a mouth. Slide 4, the credit card report. Charges from a boutique in Portland, hotel bookings, dinners for 2. All under my name, all paid by me. My old joint account, left open and forgotten until someone remembered the login. Next, photos of family events, reunions, birthdays, weddings. Each one had been cropped the same way. I had the originals. I showed them all, frame by frame, name by missing name. In the back row, Aunt June dropped her glass. Someone moved to help her. No one said anything. And at the center of the room, Emily sat frozen. Her hands were still, her eyes scanning for a cue, a line, a way out. There wasn't one. The last slide was simple. A picture of me and Dad in the garage, holding up a wooden sailboat. We weren't smiling, just focused, hands full of sawdust and quiet. And beneath it, some things were never supposed to be erased. I let the room sit with it. I didn't cry. I didn't watch my mother's face. I just stood there, letting the silence be mine for once. When the lights came back on, no one clapped. Emily stood slowly. Her mouth opened, like she meant to explain something, but the words didn't come. Her hands hovered near her chest, empty. Uncle Dennis looked away. Aunt June whispered something to her husband and left the room. Only Mom remained still, glass in hand, back straight. Her face unreadable, in that practiced way I'd seen all my life. She didn't say my name, didn't ask why I'd done it. She just said, "You didn't have to embarrass her like that." Not me, not us, just her. I looked at her, really looked. The turquoise earrings, the wine glass she never refilled but always held. And for the first time, I understood something I hadn't let myself name. She had known. Not all of it maybe, but enough. The charges, the job leads that slipped away, the way I disappeared from photos, like I'd been too hard to place. It hadn't been about loyalty. Not really. It had been about comfort. Emily didn't ask questions. I did. And asking questions in our family had always been a kind of betrayal. I didn't do it to embarrass her, I said. I kept my voice even, not angry. Just true. I did it because you were never going to stop pretending. Mom didn't respond. She turned her head toward the window, where the lake shimmered in the early dusk. Someone cleared their throat. A cousin. Then a shuffle of chairs. The spell broke, but the air stayed heavy. I walked outside before dessert. The air was cooler now, and someone had started packing up the folding tables. From the porch, I heard Emily crying. Soft, practiced. I didn't go to her. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove until the lake was just a sound, a memory, until even the pine trees felt like they belonged to someone else. 3 days passed before Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Listened to it twice before deleting. You've made things complicated, Claire. I just wish you'd handled it differently. I thought you were stronger than this. No apology. No, I didn't know. Just a shift of blame. So smooth you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. 2 days later, she sent an email. A single line, "Despite everything, I still love you." Despite. I didn't answer. What could I say that hadn't already been buried beneath years of almosts and not quites? Emily never reached out. Maybe she thought silence was the better look. Maybe she believed she'd still come out clean. Uncle Dennis unfollowed me on everything. Aunt June sent me a message that said simply, "I had no idea. I'm sorry." I didn't know whether to believe her. A week later, a small box arrived on my doorstep. Inside was a photo frame, glass heavy, the good kind. No note, just a picture tucked inside. It was me and Dad again in the garage. The same one from the end of the slideshow. But this time, someone had cleaned up the image, cropped it tight. Just our hands on the wood, sawdust in the air. No faces, no noise, just work. Quiet, steady. I don't know who sent it. Maybe it was Mom. Maybe someone else. But it sits on my shelf now. Not because I need proof, but because I need the reminder. There was a time when I was seen, not explained, not rewritten, just seen. And maybe that's all I ever wanted. The reunion photo went up 2 weeks later. Someone tagged me, probably by mistake. I wasn't in it. There was an empty chair where I had been sitting. Emily had moved into frame. Mom had her hand on her shoulder. Everyone looked full-flushed, like they'd eaten well. I didn't save the picture. I didn't need the reminder. That Sunday, I made peach cobbler from scratch. My kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something close to forgiveness. I watched the syrup bubble at the edges and didn't think about who else would taste it. I ate it warm by myself, from a chipped plate I'd had since college. No candles, no toast, just me. There are things I'll never get back, rooms I'll never be invited into again, stories already rewritten too many times to pull apart. But there's something freeing in knowing I'm no longer required to stay silent just to keep the peace. I don't know what my mother tells people now. Maybe that I was dramatic, sensitive, too smart for my own good. Maybe that I disappeared. But I didn't disappear. I just stopped standing in rooms that pretended I wasn't there. I left before dessert. I didn't say goodbye.